This meeting is being recorded.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the new 2022 Washington Commander. It's a self-driving car because it doesn't actually have anybody to steer the ship right now. And it's better than the original. Well, it's less racist than the original. Will play just as well. And ironically enough, it's still more sexist than the original. The new 2022 Washington Commander coming next to a car dealership near you. And it will still probably be available in the fall because we're going to have to put it on discount. Welcome on the Sports Lines. I'm Stephen Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan.
I'm Anthony Strait. And how much is that if you put $0 down on it? I just want to know.
You might not have to refinance is the best way. And of course, this is Mr. Joe Tufaro, and this is on the Sports Lines. Once again, Joe Tufaro was with us and is a contributor to the Twitter page Accountable Reps. It's a great Twitter feed showing the numbers of and the impact of the numbers and the reps that call those games that you will see in the NFL. We'll talk more about a lot of that stuff when we get to the Super Bowl show because we'll have a lot of actual in-game stuff to talk about. But this week, it's a lot of off-the-field stuff to make you scream and in some cases make you sick. And speaking of someone who made a lot of fans sick in New York, especially Jets fans, after a weekend of speculation, Tom Brady, 7-time Super Bowl champ, found the best possible source to break his retirement. No, not Adam Schefter, because God forbid he ever gives him anything again, but his own Instagram. Brady will no doubt go down as the greatest QB in NFL history, although according to Joe, his career will never be fulfilled thanks to the stuff that the Giants did to him. Anthony, Brady's 22-year career is like this. Almost a third of his career winning a title in his seasons, almost half of his career getting to the big game, and every year but one when he was healthy in the playoffs. Final thoughts on a masterful career.
Well, I look back at Tom Brady, and I think about this. And we went to Hausha. Giovanni Pasmati was picked before Tom Brady.
Giovanni Carmazzi, by the way, yes.
Yeah, Carmazzi. And people are like, who is that? Exactly. 22 seasons. Tom Brady got better as he got older. And that is so rare with a professional athlete. We've seen it with Michael Jordan. We've seen it with LeBron James. We've seen it with Kobe. Like, as they get older, they just seem to get so much better, and their football knowledge just expands greatly. But just think about the timeline and Tom Brady getting this opportunity. What happens if, Drew Bledsoe does get knocked out of a game in September against the Jets in 2001, and Tom Brady getting that opportunity. And then just seeing how he went from, when you watched him early on at the Patriots, kind of a game manager to a guy who picked his spots to now just being almost semi-gunslinger and just throwing the ball everywhere. When the Patriots started bringing in the likes of Wes Welker and Randy Moss and really open up that offense. But you look at also in 22 years, how he took care of himself. He took care of his body. He was always in shape. And even when he was lost for the season in 2008, he came back the following year and still put up Brady-like numbers and got New England back to the playoffs. And just the longevity, I think, is going to be really what symbolized Tom Brady. We got obviously the 7 Super Bowls, playing in 10 Super Bowls total. But when you look back on it, and it's just like, this guy literally career spanning almost 2 generations of NFL players. Like, just think about when he came in 2000, 2001, and when he's leaving out on top. It's not like he was a broken down shell of himself like we saw so many great quarterbacks. I know in particular, me watching Eli Manning, obviously, he wasn't obviously the Eli Manning that led the Giants to 2 of those Super Bowl victories against Tom Brady. But to go out still being able to physically perform the way Brady did, and he almost pulled off one more minor miracle on the way out. I bring that up because today is the anniversary, probably anniversary of that Super Bowl comeback against Atlanta. I mean, I don't know what else I can say that hasn't been said already about Tom Brady's career. Obviously, you got to factor in the stuff with Deflategate has been a kind of a factor as well. So if you want to talk about everything as a whole, but I don't think we're ever going to see anything, even a microcosm close to what Tom Brady was able to do for 22 seasons, coming in, coming out, and honestly the leadership he provided in the locker room, how players has gravitated to him. That's such a real thing, and we saw it toward obviously his last 2 years in Tampa Bay, him opening up. You see him in commercials more, being more vocal and a little more like outspoken and comical on social media.
I'm wondering, actually, before we continue, Anthony, I'm wondering if he's actually going to eat that bread at Subway that he's been promoting this whole entire.
Hey,
We don't know. We don't know, but we'll see exactly what happens. But Brady's career, Anthony, has been magical. Now, Joe, you called this kind of on our last show, so let's wax positive or negative, whichever way you want to do, about Brady retiring at 44.
Yeah, no, again, I think instead of calling him the greatest quarterback of all time and all that stuff, again, Jay and I always agree that quarterbacks get too much blame and too much credit, and he had that he played with, and a couple of other things. Had a coach there that I think some of us know his name, who's pretty decent. So I like to say he's the most accomplished quarterback in history, because obviously he was on those teams. I don't give them all to him as winning 7 Super Bowls single-handedly. I certainly say that he was on a bunch of good teams and I was able to drive that offense, that fantastic offense, the year 2007, where they scored 50 touchdowns and 50 touchdown passes. And, obviously he's very, very good at what he does. I think, again, I thought what I said last week was, to me, if you knew you were going to go out, why not go out on top, unless you really thought you were going to. That's the only thing that I thought would have been better for him, but that's okay. He did come play golf here in the desert this week. I asked him for Eli's autograph. He said next time he's try to get it for me. But again, he's the most accomplished quarterback. He did drive that team. I always found it fascinating that the guy making the most money, the guy getting all the credit in the world, the guy married to the supermodel, could bring these other guys along with him, and that they would treat him as a leader. He's a guy that had all that money and all that, anything else he wanted to do to touch the gold, was able to get some guy making $100,000 to go run routes for him and do stuff for him. I thought it is a lot of leadership. And I know the Crafts really loved him, and I think he showed a lot of family traits. I don't like the way he went out with not even mentioning Mr. Kraft or Mrs. Kraft when he passed away in 2011. I thought there was a little bit of a slight that he could have at least thanked the organization. He didn't have to go into the Belichick thing or anything, but he could have thanked the Crafts for all the opportunities they gave him, because again, that's where he started from nothing, as Anthony said. So why not just give them the credit for what they obviously did to believe in him in the beginning? That's all. I'm not saying he needs to give him credit for his career, but you could have said, hey, I used to live up north and it was pretty good. And again, I understand the Belichick thing, and that's fine.
I think the funny thing about that is, Joe, I think he kind of thought in his own mind, because I do think Brady is a little bit of a narcissist. I mean, he is married to a bigger narcissist, but I think Brady said, I think Brady thought he should have included something, but I think Brady thought, I included my goodbyes when I left them in free agency. I still don't necessarily like Bill Belichick. I think he respects him, but I don't think he liked Bill Belichick, and I still think he doesn't like Bill Belichick. And I think
but if you think, and that's what I'm saying, if you thank the organization, you kind of take that out of it, because think of all the guys he played with, the Welkers and the Edelmans and all of those guys. That's all he had to say was, where I got my start, I appreciate everything they did for me. And you didn't have to single anybody out. So, but then again, that's a low bar these days.
I do think, though, that that's sort of like the red hanging meat for the media to be like, oh, there's no Patriots on there. Oh, my God. And then it's like, okay, what's the next controversy? Luckily, unfortunately for the NFL, they made up for it later in the day. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Jay, your final thoughts on Brady?
I mean, for me, he's the GOAT of quarterbacks. I mean, it's that simple. And it's also so much more than that. I mean, you talk about the 7 Super Bowl victories, more than any other franchise, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, far and away most by any player ever. Those 10 Super Bowl appearances are more than several franchises combined. 35 playoff wins, more than Montana and Young combined. His record, 84,520 passing yards, set on a Sunday night football game on October 3rd in a 1917 win over the Patriots in Foxborough. How's that for irony? Are over 4,100 more than Drew Brees and nearly 25,000 more than Matt Ryan, the next active quarterback. His record, 624 touchdown passes, 53 more than Brees, 74 more than Aaron Rodgers, the next active quarterback. He led his teams to more wins than any quarterback in NFL history. Here's some context on those numbers. If Patrick Mahomes avoids injuries, slumps, and roster changes and maintains his career average, he still wouldn't eclipse Brady's passing yardage or TD records until 2036 when he turns 41. I mean, we all know the story, right, guys? Drafted 199th in 2000, stuck at 4th on the depth chart as a rookie, takes over the starter in 01 when Bledsoe gets hurt, never gives the job back. Here's a quick story about that. Shortly after he took over for Bledsoe and before Belichick named him the full-time starter, Brady was out at dinner with some teammates when he looked at Ty Law and Lawyer Malloy, a couple of veterans, and said, matter-of-factly, I ain't giving the job back. The vets love the attitude. I mean, you think about what Brady accomplished in New England with Belichick, and that eclipsed anything and everything accomplished by every other legendary coach-quarterback tandem we'd previously seen. Think about Chuck Nolan, Terry Bradshaw, about Bill Walsh and Joe Montana. And then what he did in Tampa Bay was just the icing on the cake of a legacy that would have been just fine without it. I mean, what I think he'll be most remembered for are all those come-from-behind and game-winning drives, especially in the postseason, specifically in the Super Bowl. John Madden called the one he orchestrated in Super Bowl 36 to beat the Rams. Said it gave him goosebumps. I mean, and Anthony referenced it earlier. The one that's going to stand out for a lot of us is the comeback from 28-3 down against the Falcons in Super Bowl 51. It's why anytime he had the ball last in any game and any amount of time left on the clock, you didn't feel a league was safe with him. There's an anecdote in a story that Jeff Howe wrote for The Athletic this past week, and it pretty much sums up who Tom Brady was and what defined him. Wide receiver Patriots teammate and a really close friend of Brady's was working out with him in the 2013 offseason when he saw a Super Bowl countdown in Brady's home gym. Brady had three Lombardi trophies at the time, one shy of Montana's total, and Edelman made a comment about that to Brady. After all, Montana was the guy every Bay Area kid idolized, Brady included, so that was the dream, right? Brady's response to Edelman's comment was, quote, I ain't going for Montana, I'm going for Jordan. No disrespect to 11-time NBA champion Bill Russell, but Brady, who went for and passed Jordan, 7 titles to 6, may be more than just the greatest quarterback in NFL history. He may be the greatest winner in sports history.
That's a very good point. And one thing, first of all, John Madden said it gave goosebumps. Remember, earlier in that drive, John Madden said, I would play for the tie with 1 minute and 46 seconds left in the Super Bowl. So Madden was wrong about Tom Brady the very first time he called one of his games.
Well, to be fair, Brady wasn't completely Brady yet.
He wasn't completely Brady, but you have to become Brady by doing Brady stuff. What do you got?
I was getting 12.5 points that day.
Also, you don't realize this. He had a 10-year gap where he didn't win a Super Bowl. You could really put his career in just 2 phases, 3 and 4, and then at the end, 5, 4, and 7, where every other year was a Tom Brady year. And the fact that the man has 10 Super Bowls is ridiculous. However, it could be 11. It could have been 11 titles if it wasn't for Eli for 2 and Peyton for another 2. So, then he really would have been the greatest winner in sports. And maybe we would have all hated football because Tom Brady would have taken it over. And he probably would have retired at like 42.
Hey, he cut the heart out of a couple of my Steelers Super Bowl potential.
The one thing that it's funny, the one thing a Giants fan could say is Brady never broke our hearts. Almost every other team in the league, Brady broke their hearts. Let's move on.
When I go on vacation and I meet guys who are Patriots fans, they're like, Oh, we're Patriots fans. Like, yeah, good. Congratulations. Keep coming. We'll just keep beating you. That's good.
Congratulations. Now what are you going to do? All right, let's move on. Meanwhile, the New York Giants ordered another plate of buffalo wings after hiring former Bills assistant Joe Shane. The former offensive coordinator of that team, Brian Daboll, is going from New York to New Jersey, technically, as the 46-year-old who's been in coaching for a quarter of a century back in William and Mary back in 1997 is now the HC of the NYG. Joe, what is your opinion on the only Brian that apparently will ever matter to the Giants and the only Brian that is currently now in Bill Belichick's cell phone?
Yeah, I like the pick. I figured that, I think we talked about this all week. I figured that was going to be it once Shane came, that he was going to grab somebody from that organization if they were allowed to do that. I didn't think that they were going to transport the whole coaching staff. Everybody was thinking they were going to get Dorsey and then they were going to get the defense. Now they're talking about the defensive guys. Like, you can't just move everybody over and say, oh, good, we're the Buffalo Bills. I like the choice that they went to an AFC team. I think, as we've all talked about, the offenses in the AFC all seem to be and able to create more offense and be able to create more things. The fact that they went out and got an offense coordinator from Kansas City, of all places, who's seen all of this stuff. And again, you build that team, and Shane's smart enough to say, I'm not bringing these guys in for this year. We're bringing this in to make this into something and to make it last for a long time and continue to build this. So I think they've gone the right way. Instead of going back to old school, let's run the ball for 2 yards and see where it comes out on the other end, let's go ahead and try to modernize this whole system. And to bring in a guy who's an offensive coordinator, a guy who's worked in all of those places. Again, it's amazing. All of these coaches now have all that same pedigree of and somewhere else. They've all worked at some pretty big places, some fairly successful places. Everything I've read about them, again, these guys have been in the league, all of them, for 25 years or so. So it's a matter of there really are football guys. He got the call and he was ecstatic. He wanted to come. They left that day, I guess, and drove down from Buffalo. And they really are. They really are happy to be here, and they're looking to redo it. And Shane seems to have gotten not only the open checkbook from the Mariners, but the go ahead and tell us what we're doing wrong. Modernize this franchise, bring us into he said his meeting for the first time, he's bringing next week to talk to them and to go over what type of player they want. He said, and then I'll see how they act. If they're the guys, if they really know how to see personnel and stuff. So I think Daboll's a good answer. I think bringing in an offensive coordinator, so maybe he does not have to call the plays because they really don't want him to. They want him to be the head coach, be the CEO. As we all know, Patrick Graham went to Vegas last night, so we'll have to be looking for a DC. But I like him going to the Senior Bowl to put a staff together. He kept McGahee on special teams, so I think he's building it pretty good. He's building it with solid people again, but they're all young, right? They're all in their 30s. They're not bringing in a lot of these. Again, picking off that one, you're picking off the new one, but the guys who've had the roots, as Shane does, all the way back to Parcells. Daboll go all the way back to, again, New England, Alabama. All these guys that work together and know each other. So it's like starting a new tree. So it'll be good. I'm excited for it. I like the staff he's putting together. They got one more step to go. Big step to get a defensive guy now. But I think, as Rabbi and I talked last night, it was a little bit of a joke. We both did it at the same time. We agree on, there's still a lot of defensive talent out there that could be signed. There's Fangio, there's Martindale, there's a couple other guys out there. Even Gerard Mayo, somebody brought up the other day. It's, there's could be really good fits. And I think it's, I thought it was a really good hire. And again, we'll talk about the process, I'm sure, in a minute, but I like how they went through everything.
We'll talk about definitely talking about the process. And Jay, that staff needs a little more tuning. Let's talk more about bringing in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I like this hiring. And I basically said, that Daboll, would be the guy once Shane was hired as GM due to their ties in Buffalo and the work Daboll did developing Josh Allen into the tier 1 franchise quarterback he's become. And Daboll's number 1 job will be to try and replicate that success with Daniel Jones. Giants co-owner John Mara was quite open about that after introducing Daboll on Monday. And here's the quote. We have a quarterback that we have a lot of confidence in who has had some issues here, mostly due to the way we've handled him. A big part of Brian's job is going to be to try to get the most out of Daniel and put us in a position where we can make a fair evaluation of him. We haven't been able to do that so far because of the way we've handled him, end quote. Now, Mara believes that even he shoulders some of the blame for Jones's lack of development through 3 seasons, saying at the press conference to introduce new GM Joe Shane, he said, we've done everything possible to screw this kid up since he's been here. And Mara noted repeatedly changing head coaches. Daboll will be Jones's 3rd, offensive coordinators, his 4th, offensive line coaches. It'll be his 5th, has affected the quarterback's growth. Add a leaky offensive line, playmakers lacking either ability or durability to that lack of coaching stability. And there's more than a fair case that Jones has not been put in the best position to succeed. Now, when the news broke of Daboll's hire, Joe and I were texting, and we both agreed that the guys that Daboll brings in to be the offensive coordinator and the quarterback coach are the staffing moves that would bear the most watching. Joe alluded to this earlier. The guy who would have been the likely choice for OC was Ken Dorsey, who was Daboll's quarterback coach in Buffalo, but the Bills promoted Dorsey to take over for Daboll as OC, so the new Giants boss would have to look elsewhere. And that search led him to Mike Kafka, the quarterback coach and passing game coordinator for the Chiefs. It's a guy coming in from Andy Reid's offense, so blending his idea with Daboll's should make for an offense that on paper and in the playbook should be anything other than the vanilla scheme we've seen the last 2 seasons from Jason Garrett. Kafka has a reputation for creativity and open-mindedness. He's been known to borrow ideas from college and even the high school level. Now, the obvious question, which you guys alluded to, is if Kafka will call the plays. You guys are correct. Joe Shane has said he'd prefer to have the offensive coordinator call the plays so the head coach can manage the game as CEO. Daboll said he plans to wait until the team goes through the offensive offseason program before deciding that. He said ideally he'd let the OC call the plays, but he also said it's important to have trust in his staff to feel comfortable releasing such a large and important responsibility. Now, that makes sense as Daboll and Kafka have no real working history. They overlapped in the 2013 offseason when Daboll was the Patriots tight end coach and Kafka spent 6 months on the roster as a backup quarterback before being acquired off waivers by Jacksonville. Now, before coming here, Kafka's entire 5-year NFL coaching career has been in Kansas City, so he's never been a play caller. It'll be interesting to see how Daboll handles this, but I wouldn't be surprised if the early days of the Daboll-Kafka pairing resembles that of Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City, with Daboll calling the plays, but Kafka having a big role in the game planning. That pairing has turned out pretty well for the Chiefs and their young quarterback. The Giants and Daniel Jones should be so lucky.
And luckily, that would mean that we would never lose Kafka to another team because of Eric Bieniemy's history, apparently, but then coaching hires, actually. Also, the funny thing is that Kafka works so well with Reid, and one of the jobs that Daboll had was offensive coordinator of the Chiefs under a terrible regime with Romeo Cornell, who didn't even last the entire season, and Reid retained him. So, and I'll talk about that in a second. Anthony, expectations are not so high, would you expect, though, in the beginning of this partnership?
No, and that was the one day Brian Daboll in his press conference did stress out that he wasn't going to make any promises to, turn the Giants into a contender right away. He did mention let's start crawling before we can walk. And if you look at the Giants the last few years, that's kind of the idea you have to do with this team. I mean, you got a lot of question marks, not just with Daniel Jones, but also at running back. What exactly you're going to get out of Saquon Barkley? Has he going to was essentially a contract year? I mean, what do you do with the offensive line that just over what the last several years has been literally one of the weakest spots of the Giants franchise? The wide receiver core. I mean, can they stay on the field? I mean, one of the biggest issues with Daniel Jones' struggles is the fact that his targets, or at least his receivers that was going into the season, just could not stay on the field. It wasn't Kenny Galladay one day. It was Sterling Shepard the next. There was Kadarius Toney. There were just guys in and out. And then it got to a point where one game against Carolina, he basically was throwing against practice squad members. And clearly the time and everything was out of sync. Who's going to coach the defense? And what kind of scheme or are you going to run with the defense? Because the Giants kind of had a hybrid mix of 3-4 combinations the last couple of seasons with Patrick Graham. Now that kind of goes out the window. When you look at Ryan Daboll, and I think you see the success that he had in Buffalo with Josh Allen. I think it was important that he didn't want to get the fan base expectations up high because of what he's done in his previous job, compared to what he needs to do now. Because unlike Buffalo, which did have a good defense, just needed the quarterback and the offense to kind of come around, which it eventually did. The Giants, for what it's worth, the defense, if you can make the argument, they kind of took a step back, and some of it because of the injuries as well. And the offense is completely broken. So it's like a total repair job for an organization that is going through the fourth head coach now.
Years
since Tom Kaplan had left after 2015. So it's like the constant change and the inconsistency with the organization has been a major problem. And if you're going to turn the team around, you gotta have the same consistency. Everybody's gotta be in line, gotta be in sync. I think that's one of the things he did do a good job of stressing during this presser, that everyone in the organization has to be in line, has to be on the same page. He may not be the most enthusiastic speaker. His 4-year-old son fell asleep through it all, but I think if he can keep the guys in the meeting room wide awake, that'd be a big difference. But yeah, I think that was one of the things, most important things I took away from. Like, hey, look, let's not get our expectations up so high. This is going to be a work in progress. It may be a year or two before the Giants are actually even a playoff team, let alone a Super Bowl contender, because of so many question marks with this team.
Honestly, I think organizations, there's this thing called Mad Libs. And I think every time you have one of these press conferences, as long as the coach sticks to the Mad Libs, it's fine. You don't want a news conference to have something with like a bad headline, like Adam Gase's eye roll, the Chicago Bears really having the most boring press conference that it got mentioned, or of course, any Chicago Blackhawks town halls that happened during the week where their ownership goes insane when you ask them a question about the past. You have to stay kind of in the moment. Even if your 4-year-old falls asleep during an opening press conferences, you're doing a good job because you're not saying anything because what you're going to say is going to be on the field.
What I did also like was he said when he got there, the other guy in the building was Daniel Jones. And he said, and somebody asked the question, so what's your system? And he said, no, he goes, we're going to talk to Daniel and say, what are you comfortable doing? What did you do in college? What have you done here that you like? And they're going to build a system around his assets. Daniel can run with the ball just like Josh Allen could. So there's some stuff there that's anything. But again, we're not trying to recreate, the worst thing about sports commentators these days is, automatically you're going to turn Daniel Jones into Patrick Mahomes because you brought the guy in for Kansas. That's not the key here. The key is to make Daniel Jones the best and see where it takes
competitive guy.
And those guys seem to be on that page, and that's what they want. So.
It's just funny considering how Daboll's career is kind of taken a second act. I think you could really kind of use a dividing line. He was coaching Brett Favre with the Jets as quarterbacks coach in 2008, and then the Cleveland spot, he was with the 32nd. But the people who he worked with, Cleveland, he worked with Eric Mangini, who was terrible. He worked with Tony Sparano in Miami, who was terrible. He worked with Romeo Crennel in Kansas City, who was terrible. The moment he got back to tight ends coach, he won 2 championships with the New England Patriots. He won a title with Tua and Jalen Hurts as quarterbacks, as the offensive coordinator of Alabama, and the success he's had in Buffalo. So obviously, unfortunately, I know Joe does not like making the big coordinator the head coach, but if you're going to go that route, which it seemed like that was the only route to go, seemingly in this coaching cycle, that's where you go. So let's see what happens. We have a lot of time to talk about it. And then we get to the saga of the other Brian Flores, as the former Miami Dolphins head coach filed a class action suit against the NFL and 3 organizations in specific: the New York Giants, the Denver Broncos, and the Miami Dolphins. The Giants were the unfortunate beneficiaries of an unfortunate Bill Belichick test that went to the wrong Brian on getting the Giants head coaching job, which basically said to Flores made the upcoming job interview meaningless. The Broncos' Rooney Rule abuse dates back to 2019 when in Flores' interview for the then vacant HC spot, owner John Elway and CEO Joe Ellis showed up an hour late, disheveled and hungover, and in no way taking seriously the Rooney Rule acquired interview. And then where do you start with the Miami Dolphins? Owner Stephen Ross offering the then coach $100,000 for each game that they lost. Ross pressuring Flores to break tampering rules. Yeah, clusterfuck. Okay, so Anthony, unpack whatever you want to do right now about this single.
You know, it's funny because yesterday was, we talking about Super Bowl anniversaries, you get more of that as you get closer to the big game. Yesterday was the anniversary of Super Bowl 41, and we had two Black coaches, and Lovie Smith and Tony Dungy coaching that game respectively. First time that's ever happened. Never in my imagination that in 2021, we would literally only have one head coach who was African-American or even or non-white in the National Football League. And this, you know what, the lawsuit, even I don't think he's going to win this lawsuit, but what it does is it brings to light what, if you follow the NFL, if you haven't lived under a rock or anything like that the last decade or so, what we've all known, and that the NFL has a huge problem when it comes to minority hiring, for us the culture ranks. And yeah, it goes to ownership. You have to start with ownership at that kind of main source of that problem. I mean, you have one Black head coach in a league where the workforce, the majority of players, which over 700 of them, 70% are African American, and that is, and it just it's mind boggling. But then you think about some of these owners, you know, being in the 60s, 70s, in the 50s, even kind of being stuck in their ways, and it's an unfortunate microcosm of how sadly society has been as well. It's not just Black African Americans. You've seen it with other ethnic groups as well. But to see how the NFL has handled this coaching, this whole minority hiring situation, when it wasn't trying to bribe teams, you know, to hire more African American candidates, or take draft picks away from them, or even the Rooney Rule, which in theory had the right idea in mind, but we've seen teams kind of bring in African American candidates just to kind of, you know, get that checkbox off. You know, and it just brings to light really exactly what's been a major problem. And I saw, and I don't know if you saw the clip I sent earlier. That was the Ted Koppel interview back in 1987. And
the Dodgers exec.
You know, and the uncomfortable thing is you do have front office and ownership in sports that have that kind of thinking. And that is the really scary and uncomfortable thing if you are an aspiring coach and you want to get to the highest profession possible, which is the National Football League. And this is what may potentially you be up against. And look, I grew up with Brian. I know he's a great guy. I know he's a great high character. I know his family for many years. And I think he was a great coach. I felt like Miami, he got a raw deal, and they did get David Culley as well, you know, and it was like, it brings up the question, the days like Black coaches getting a shorter leash than their white counterparts and not getting the second opportunity. So like, I'm hearing about Adam Gase, he's been a coordinator in New England. I'm like, are you kidding me? After the disaster we just saw at MetLife Stadium for 2 seasons, and you see, and it's bringing a lot of those things into the light. But the question for me is the NFL is, what are you going to do about it? Because you can have all the slogans in the end zones. You can have nice catchphrases on a helmet bumper, or have every game lead off with lift every voice and sing. It doesn't matter with lip service. Your actions have to speak louder than words. And right now, the NFL has done a terrible job with minority hiring. They've done a terrible job with dealing with domestic violence and concussions. We've known this for years and years and years, but at some point, fans and even members of the media, even members within the NFL, you got to start holding this league responsible, because it's like at one point, then the actions outweigh the words right now. Because right now the NFL really has done a lot of lip service, but the question is going to be, what are you going to do with this, with a problem that everyone sees, but now it's just being brought into the forelight because of this lawsuit?
Let me accentuate this very simply. Since 2016, we're going on 6 seasons now. There has been an African-American head coach that has been fired every single year. And I'm not saying it's coincidence, but it's a disturbing trend. Jay?
Yeah, Rabbi, I'm gonna follow on with some of the comments that Anthony made, and then I'm going to unpack the Giants end of this thing for us. So bear with me. We've long known on this show, and I've said it more than once, that the old white men who run the NFL pay lip service, if that, to everything a league has tried to do to improve and increase opportunities for minority coaches to try and move up the ladder to coordinator and head coaching positions. Sure, there have been exceptions here and there, and Anthony made a couple, but more often than not, a season has gone by with Mike Tomlin as the only minority head coach. So with that as my mindset, when the story initially broke about this lawsuit, the optics kind of looked bad for the Giants, and I was ready to take them to the proverbial woodshed. Flores had those text messages from Bill Belichick, which seemed to indicate the hoodie had been told by someone with knowledge of the Giants' hiring plan that it already had been decided that Daboll had the job, even though Flores was scheduled to have dinner and then an in-person interview with Joe Shane, ownership, and others, which had Flores thinking the entire process was a sham, justifying his humiliation and his anger. The Giants' initial response was the usual boilerplate about the accusations having no merit, defending the organization's hiring practices, and that everything was done above board. It's the type of CYA statement that doesn't make most of us in sports media believe the team was innocent, since A, see my opening remark about the Rooney Rule, and 2, we've heard this type of methinks he doth protest too much stuff from ownership folk so many times. And then at 6 p.m. on Thursday, Joe sent me a text telling me to check my email. He'd sent us the Giants' follow-up statement, complete with a timeline of events that seemed to refute Flores' claims and put Belichick's text in some context. It also seems to put Flores' accusation regarding the Giants, at least, on less solid ground. Here's some things that stood out for me in that statement. 1, the allegation that the Giants' decision had been made prior to Friday evening, January 28, is false. I'm quoting the Giants here, folks. And to base that allegation on a text exchange with Bill Belichick, in which he ultimately states that he thinks Brian Daboll would get the job, is irresponsible. The text change occurred the day before Coach Daboll's in-person interview even took place. Giants ownership would never hire a head coach based on only a 20-minute Zoom interview, which is all that Mr. Daboll had to that point. In addition, Mr. Belichick does not speak for and has no affiliation with the Giants. Mr. Belichick's text exchange provides no insight into what actually transpired during our head coaching search. Points that are well taken. It's been well documented. This is the second point that stood out for me. How much research and due diligence the Giants did on Mr. Flores as it related to his candidacy. Mara called Flores 2 days after he was dismissed in Miami, expressed to Flores that in that January 12th call that once they had their new general manager in place, they'd begin the process of hiring a head coach, and they wanted to meet with Flores because they considered him a serious candidate for the job. Mara and Flores had their first formal conversation in a Zoom call on the 18th. To further discuss his candidacy. So it does seem like the Giants were not paying lip service to Flores at all. They had a serious interest in him. And in between those initial conversations, this is the third point. And Mr. Flores' in-person interview on January 27, there were several other communications apparently between Flores and members of the Giants organization, including a dinner with, the aforementioned dinner with Joe Shane the night before, and then the in-person interview. The consensus from within the Giants organization after the dinner remained that Flores was an outstanding candidate, and they look forward to sitting down with him in person the next day, which they did. Now, Flores did a CBS interview earlier this week. He did the rounds of those types of shows after the suit was made public, and he was asked, quote, if clubs have the right to hire the person they think is the best qualified. for the job or the person they feel is right. And according to the Giants, this is exactly what they did. They hired Brian Daboll as their head coach at the conclusion of an open and thorough interview process. No decision was made and no job offer was extended until the evening of January 28, a full day after Flores' in-person interview and day-long visit with the Giants, which would, with all this information in mind, and thank you, Joe, for providing it, I'm leaning towards the Giants on this. It does seem like they did it the right way, but I don't think we're even remotely close to done with this story, especially if the allegations against the Broncos and the Dolphins turn out to have any merit. Even if Flores is wrong and the Giants did do it right, I stand by my opening remarks, guys. And as Anthony said, the system is broken. And if this lawsuit lays bare just how broken, then just maybe the NFL will be forced to do more than pay lip service to it.
Well, here's also the Broncos actually did do a decent job making a statement a couple of days after from John Elway explaining why he looked drunk that day, saying he got 4 hours of sleep. But here's my problem with the whole thing, and I'll get to you, Joe, in just a moment. Even if any of these allegations is proven false, it's going to come off for a lot of people, especially in Twitter world, as a knock on the Black community, which it shouldn't. This shouldn't be the end all be all conversation on race and the Rooney Rule and African American hiring practices in the NFL. This should just be an example and of things to come. Not everything is going to be true on this. It's going to be very unlikely that everything is going to be found in favor of Flores. This is multi-level, Joe. And we'll talk whatever angle you want to go through this, but we'll talk more about the Dolphins angle in this in just a moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's twofold. I think it's two separate issues, because you're talking about this lawsuit. If that's what we're talking about, I think, like you just said, unfortunately, it's going to come out that some of the things that, and I'm not even going to say that Brian said, some of the things that Brian's attorneys said are going to turn out to be exaggerations or assumptions or whatever. Why you're talking to Bill Belichick about the head coaching job at the Giants doesn't even make any sense. Why is he reaching out and saying, "Oh, congratulations," whatever it is? He said, I'm not part of this. There's this inner communication that I'm not part of, that these other guys talk to each other. Don't forget, Bill Belichick also said Joe Judge would be a great head coach, and they went that direction. So I don't think they're taking too much of his word at this point anymore anyway. But I think it's two separate issues, because I agree with Anthony and I agree with Jay that more has to be done. But I also think you have to look at how things progress and how long it takes to do what you're asking to do. And then the lawsuit's a separate issue, because I don't think the Giants did anything wrong. The point that everyone's left out is Leslie Frazier had 2 interviews with them before they even got to Brian Flores for a second. So, because we were all saying when Gettleman first left and they fired Joe Judge, and it went out there that they had called Brian Flores, people on Twitter were like, "Why are you calling Brian Flores?" And Mara said, "Hey, he doesn't have a team. I'm allowed to talk to him." And he said, every GM candidate we've talked to has put a list together of who they'd like to see as a head coach. And he was on every one of them. So they were serious about it. They called him, they brought it in. Again, if Shane is more comfortable with a guy that he's worked with, I can't fault that. As an owner, you have to say, if this is your guy, then that's your guy. Again, the last thing you want to do is force somebody onto somebody in that situation. So I don't think they did anything wrong. The Denver one, John said, look, we were given one opportunity to meet with Brian. He told us when we had work. We flew all night. We did, again, you flew on a private plane, so I'm sure you got some sleep. But you did, but again, you accommodate, he's trying to say we accommodated Brian. So for him to come out years later and say, I felt like I was disrespected, that's always going to be a question. I don't think Brian made this call to his attorneys. I think it came the other way. I think somebody came to Brian and said, this is an opportunity for us to bring this out, not for you to win money, not for you to make a name for yourself, because he's certainly not making a good name for himself currently. I think somebody went to him and said, this is an opportunity to change things for the better. And that's fine. So again, I'm not putting a lot of stuff on him. He may wind up getting the head coaching job in Houston. So who knows?
New Orleans, those spots are still available.
Yeah, he hasn't been completely ostracized to the point where no one's going to talk to him anymore or anything. So I think it's going to go well that way. my other point is, and Anthony, you brought this up, and I agree with you 100% that there's not enough involvement, but there have been the Marvin Lewis's and Romeo Cornells and a few different guys who have gotten the opportunity. And I say on this show all the time, not everybody's cut out to be a head coach. And whatever you are, and Ron Rivera, I guess, is considered a minority, so there are two, but.
And Robert Saleh is also among the minority.
But I think the point is, not everybody's cut out to be a head coach. A lot of people do better at other places. So there's been fired for different reasons, guys who haven't made it through the year, whatever they are. I don't see anybody as one way or the other. So, but as you look through the system, Anthony, and you say, hey, do we have enough guys in college being head coaches or coordinators that are really getting that point? Because every one of these guys, as we pointed out earlier in the segment here, all of these guys that are getting hired have 25 and 30 years experience in the NFL. So you can't just start at the top and say, we got to make guys head coaches. You have to make sure these guys have been brought up through the ranks. And I think that's where they could do better, is get guys to be position coaches. And again, get more ex-players involved. We've even thought officiating would be better. That's what we try to do at the high school level, is get players involved who love the game. So if you get more ex-players like the Antonio Pierces of the world and those guys who are now moving on up. Antonio Pierce now looks like he could get a job in the NFL after being at Arizona State under,
Herb Edwards is possibly not going to be giving his job in Arizona State.
And again, so now but now he's only been out of the league, 8 years. So you need to build up that resume. And I think that's what guys look at more than what they look at is race, Anthony. I really do. I think owners look at, this guy's been here for 30 years. This guy's been 25 years. It's not just a walk in and do it position. And I think that's the key to this and we've seen it. Football is a lot more complex than what we all think it is watching it on TV, and what people see, just like refereeing is a lot more involved than what you guys go through on TV. I think that case of building those guys up through the college ranks, getting more head coaches there, getting those guys to make the jump and be successful. And they shouldn't go and be head coaches from being a head coach in the college ranks. They should go be coordinators. They should go be position coaches and put your dues in and get to that point. And I agree with you. They failed miserably for the last 30 years, but that's where it's going to come up. You can't just install somebody in, because to me, that's setting them up more for failure. There's got to be a reason why Eric Bieniemy not only doesn't get jobs at this, there's something about him that he either doesn't show enough fire, he doesn't show enough. Maybe the only thing he has in his resume is, I can run an offense that Andy Reid taught me. You don't know, because we're not in those rooms. And I don't mean to single him out, but there are guys that just aren't head coach material. And I would hate to see, I think it does you less good to put people in positions and have them fail miserably than to just give them an opportunity and say, oh, look how many black head coaches we have. To me, that's worse. I would rather see guys move up. Again, the Giants, if they had kept Patrick Graham, they have black coordinators. I don't hear anybody bitching about the Dallas Cowboys, who have never had a coach. Maybe it's because they have Dak Prescott. Maybe they get a box check. But all of those guys, the Rams are an all-white coaching staff. I think that's terrible. I think the guys like Bruce Arians do better. By now, you got Byron Leftwich, who could have been the head coach of Jacksonville, but decided it was a bad move. And you got
that's another story.
But again, but he's smart not to take the job just to take the job,
right?
To become the next black head coach. That can't be the criteria. He has to be set up to be successful. And just like Tomlin was in Pittsburgh, he's set up to be successful and to be with somebody who's going to stay with him and be patient. And I think that's the case. Is don't just do it to do it. Let's make sure they're prepared and everybody is on that same level, because I think it's worse if you do it that way.
Yeah, and Rabbi, you and I have both seen throughout the years, there are definitely some guys who just seem to be a better fit as a coordinator. Dan Quinn in Atlanta, Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay. There are some guys, Shermer, North Turner. There are some guys who are just better served as coordinators. But the other point that Joe made that I want to kind of like, kind of tack on, and then I'll give you the ball, Rabbi, is we have seen so many bad GM coach pairings where it's a forced marriage that, look, ownership across the NFL makes ridiculously bad hires for head coaching, no matter the skin color of the guy they bring in, because they don't understand what actually makes for a good head coach. And that's why I think it's imperative that you get the GM installed first, let him do the coaching search, and you pair him with a guy that he has a shared vision with. You don't force the marriage. It's why, say what you want. Shane and Daboll, there's a relationship already there. You look at the new head coach and GM pairing with the Raiders. Those guys have history together. That's kind of what you're looking for. That's the best route. And that's the way it should go. And hopefully, maybe we'll see more of these in the future and we'll get better head coaching hires. But yeah, Joe, I'd like to see more of these former players start paying their dues as assistants, then position coaches, and then coordinators. Because that's the other thing the Rooney Rule is to get more of these guys up into coordinator interviews where they can kind of make a name for themselves.
Which
Rabbi,
they have, by the way. Thanks
some of
for
them have,
and letting me actually do my own talking on my own show. But I think Nico Ryans is another really good example of how he clerk. No one's talking about the fact that there are a lot of, by the way, all white. Thank you for not mentioning Hofstra's Raheem Morris, who, by the way, is a very, very very good guy on the Rams staff who was going for coordinator positions. I think there's so many ways to take in what you guys said about the development of people. And I think, like I said, D'Amico Ryans, who's only 37, who was already a finalist for spots, might need a little more head coaching experience. That's a definite example of somebody who's probably going to get a head coaching job sooner rather than later. And then the obvious bad example of somebody who needed more coaching before going into the NFL is Matt Rule. Matt Rule has been a terrible head coach so far for the Carolina Panthers. Okay, 2 points I want to get to really quickly because we've gone way over on time and I want to talk about on the field stuff. Number one, the Miami Dolphins part of this is the most damning to me because it doesn't just involve race. And it does involve race in my opinion, but with the rumors that Stephen Ross offered him $100,000 when he was trying to help his team not be a laughingstock on hot take shows and getting themselves from 0-8 to 5-11 or 6-10. I don't remember what that season was, but most importantly, winning a game last week of the season against the New England Patriots that essentially put them into the wild card round, put Kansas City into the divisional round automatically when they still had 6 teams, and changing the course of the season, all because he got his players to give a shit at the end of the season. That's amazing. And then, of course, Stephen Ross is killing him because why are you not losing so we can get a better draft pick? So they're probably still bitching about not getting Joe Burrow to this day and not having the worst pick in the draft. Oh, well, life is tough. You deal with the guys who you got. And then putting the pressure on him to be the one who tampers with a prominent NFL quarterback who many people are assuming and has been reported to be Tom Brady in his free agent season, and then denying it and then saying, my hands are clean of this. The problem with the whole Flores situation with the Dolphins is Flores, in his firing, was told he wasn't winning enough. And then they asked him 2 years ago not to win. That is the most damning argument to all of this. Not the fact that he didn't even get hired, because it's all because of the Rooney Rule mostly. Because what are these people doing? They're satisfying the Rooney Rule. And the Rooney Rule to some people, unfortunately, seems like a burden that it is to actually show that it is something that is doing a good job. By the way, about the ownership, the NBA has, I think, Jordan is technically the only Black primary owner in all of the NBA. And I think there's a couple of former players who are part of ownership groups. That league is 70 4% African American as of 2020, 15 African American head coaches. That's a more accurate representation of the league that they are currently in. Moving on. All right. My God, thank God we're going to go over to a big game, and that is coming up to SoFi Stadium in 8 days. Football on the field. So let's take an opening look at the Los Angeles Rams going on the road. Well, they're the road team in their own stadium, thanks to that alternating conference thing. So they're going to be the one who will be on the road at SoFi Stadium hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's start with the Rams, whose 20-17 win last weekend against the Niners proves that the third time really is a charm. It's not just a sign. It's the Rams' second Super Bowl in 4 seasons, as the Rams will be looking to match their Lombardi they won while the franchise was still in St. Louis with one in LA. By the way, if the Rams win the Super Bowl, do you treat that as their first Super Bowl? I almost kind of do, because it's not like Los Angeles is like, oh my God, this is our second Super Bowl. It's not like the St. Louis, Los Angeles crossover is so huge that there's going to be like somebody who's a fan of Georgia Frontier back in the day. It's like, I remember when this all happened. So it's their first Super Bowl, in my opinion. All right. All that being said, Jay, take a positive from that NFC title victory that needs to continue in 8 days.
Rabbi, they may be the de facto road team, but they do get to dress in their own home dressing room.
And Anthony made a good point to me, by the way. 3-14 in the last 17 Super Bowls for teams that have not won white.
There you go. The one positive that I was looking at that needs to continue, and it's a bit of a niche one at the moment, and that's converting on third down, and it starts with Matthew Stafford. One of the big reasons the Rams did not lose the third, for the third straight time this season to the 49ers was their ability to keep drives alive by converting on third down. They went 11 of 18, including both of Stafford's touchdown passes to Cooper Kupp. All season long, Stafford's been solid passing on third down for the Rams. Even though it's the down he's spent the least amount of time in, as the Rams offense has done most of their damage on first down. His 104.3 passer rating on third down, 7th in the NFL. His 12 third down TD passes are tied for 4th. His 64.5% completion percentage is 5th. His 9.8 yards per attempt and his 1,379 passing yards on third down, both of those are number 1 in the NFL. His 141 attempts are just 12th. The 74 first downs are 3rd. His 19 pass plays of 20-plus yards or more on third down tied for 2nd, ironically with Joe Burrow. The only real negative stat on third down for Stafford is the expected one, and that's interceptions. Stafford's 17 picks ties him with Trevor Lawrence for the most in the NFL. 7 of those came on third down. The Rams as a team, 5th in the NFL on third down conversion rate during the regular season at 44.9. They're at even 50% so far in the playoffs. Stafford is a quarterback, converted 52.5% of his third down throws into first downs, tops in the NFL. He's going against a Bengals defense that was 21st during the regular season in third down conversion rate allowed at 41.3. And they're at 39.5 in the playoffs. The Rams have to like their chances at keeping drives alive. Look, we know how explosive the Bengals offense can be. Easiest way to slow them down, limit the amount of time they have the ball. How do you do that? Keep drives alive, convert on third down.
It's kind of funny considering the Rams running game has been, and that's the way you help continue.
Which I'm going to kind of get into in our next segment.
All right. So let's move on to Anthony. What is I want to talk about it. All right, Anthony, for one of the more highly scrutinized teams that ended up with a 4 seed that made a Super Bowl, there are enough negatives also from that Niner game that need to be fixed before next Sunday, especially in that second half.
Yeah, definitely. And look at the last month of the season. The Rams has kind of put themselves in a position where their own self-inflicted wounds and mistakes could have been their undoing in any of these games over the last month. If you think about this, Matthew Stafford doing 17 interceptions in the regular season. That was in the top 5. And that regular season finale against San Francisco, he threw 2 interceptions. And then you think about the game against the wild card game against Arizona. Even though the defense dominated that game and made Kyler Murray look like a player not ready for the postseason, the offense left a lot of plays on the field. Missed opportunities left and right. And then you get to the divisional playoff against Tampa Bay, and here's a list of mistakes that allow Tampa Bay to even come back in that game. A Cam Akers fumble late in the half when they had a chance to tackle on the lead. Cooper Kupp fumbled the ball away, so that was another turnover. The Rams using just 31 seconds of clock on a possession after Tampa Bay cut the lead to 27-13. Then the Rams fumbled a snap on the next play. Eric Reynolds called for a personal foul penalty. Luckily, it didn't cost them what would have been an automatic first down because of a technicality of the call being made after the play was over. Then you think of Cam Akers' second fumble that led to the Tampa Bay tying the game. These are all mistakes. And then you think about the NFC Championship game. A red zone interception thrown by Matthew Stafford. A key drop on third down by Cooper Kupp. A missed field goal. Sean McVay's allergic reaction to keeping timeouts late in games for whatever reason. And I like to know, I don't know many Rams fans, particularly personally, but I would like to know their reaction when they went into the fourth quarter with only one timeout down by 10, because Sean McVay has this uncanny ability to challenge plays when maybe he should hold on to a timeout later on
Right?
and actually do his team some good. Look, the Rams have been able to overcome their own mistakes in part because they've been able to make the big plays when needed. We think about the big pass play, the Cooper Kupp that set the game winning field goal. You think about the drive that gave them the lead towards the end of the NFC Championship game, and obviously Jimmy G becoming Jimmy G at a bad time for San Francisco. Against Cincinnati, and we saw what the Bengals able to do against Kansas City, and we'll get to in the next segment. You cannot make these self-inflicted wounds and think you're going to keep getting away with it time and time and time again. The Rams have been able to kind of skate on thin ice and get away with it. Really since towards the end of the regular season, but they've got to clean up some of these mistakes, even the fundamentals of not turning the ball over and not committing penalties at a bad time that kills the drive, and Sean McVay maybe be a little more conservative for this timeouts. I mean, I think it would help a little bit if you have at least 2 timeouts halfway through a fourth quarter. That may help your team. But these are some of the issues that the Rams have to clean up, and they've been good enough to overcome them. But you can only play with fire so long before you get burned.
Yeah, but it's funny. Sean McVay, I don't think that man has ever heard the word conservative in his entire life, and I don't think he's going to start now. Joe, give me an X factor for the Fighting Cronkies.
Yeah, just one comment. The Rams fans do notice the timeout situation because, and it was pointed out also that in that Kansas City Buffalo game, both teams went to the last 2 minutes with all 3 of their timeouts. Matter of fact, Kansas City had 3 timeouts with 13 seconds left. And it's the only reason the game was even still decided at the end of the 2 minutes was because they both had 3 timeouts left. Whereas if the Rams had been in their situation, you could have just knelt on the ball.
Isn't that more of a somebody should tell you that this is not worth a challenge situation up top?
You know, how many times, Rabbi and Jay, do we talk about analytics? There's an analytic for you. Keep your friggin' timeouts.
That's a huge analytic. That's kind of the analytic that you can only put on paper that could be in this single bold lettering that says timeouts are important.
Yeah, so second half timeouts matter. So
Yep.
Anyway, what was my question?
X factor, the backup tight end for the Rams.
Yeah. So here, to me, the X factor is, and I actually, we had to look up his name, Jay and I, because we actually didn't know who it was. But Kendall Blanton, who might be taking over for Tyler Higbee, I guess there's still a question of whether or not he's still going to be very, very important in this case. So here's a guy who doesn't play all year long, gets targeted twice in the Tampa game, catches both of them, I think, for first downs. One for a touchdown and one for a first down, and then gets targeted 5 times in this game and catches all 5 for 67 yards for an 11.5-yard average. So here's a guy, when we went into this postseason and I was driving into the Arizona game with some Rams fans, they all said they need to get Higbee more involved because that's what frees up Cooper Kupp. That's what frees up Odell and makes the offense work a little bit better. Plus, Blanton is a much better run blocker. So once they found out he could catch the ball and he could run all of these nice things, now all of a sudden, and Jay talks about this all the time, right? You can double those other guys and keep them off the board. But if this guy's catching first downs on every catch and catching touchdowns and is able to not only get open and fake his way out there by doing a little bit of a block and then leaking out afterwards and nobody's getting to him. And again, he hasn't dropped the ball. So he's the new David Tyree of the postseason. You know, you catch four balls during the season, catch 4 balls in the postseason, and 2 touchdowns, and all of a sudden you're a hero. So I think that he's kind of that X factor that if he can make Cincinnati play a little bit different defense, if he could take that simple thing of, hey, all we have to do is double Cooper and keep Odell in front of us, that opens up. Bryant could be a big part of this. And again, he helps the run game a lot because by stats and by Pro Football Focus and all those places, he's a much better run blocker than Higbee has been. And he's a more willing blocker because he doesn't play, right? He's played 3 games all year. So he's obviously willing to do whatever he can. And he's been thrust into the situation. You know, he was 4th on the depth chart. He's an undrafted free agent. And, you know, he wound up getting the job and in the biggest spot. So I think he's going to be the key to this, whether or not this offense works as simply and easily as it can without then forcing Stafford to try to force some balls and do some things that he's not comfortable with.
All right, so coming up next on tight end corner is the guy who the Rams need to plan for to stop. And I actually think Jamar Chase is just a Captain Obvious pick for me. So I'm going to go a little bit outside the box. I go with CJ Uzomah, who also might not actually play in this game. So they'll have already one part of that done. But especially in the red zone, you need to have a good tight end who is the big target, and Uzomah has been that way. 6 catches, 64 yards in the wild card round against the Raiders, 7 for 71. No scores in that game, but did very well, especially keeping Tribes alive. And then got hurt pretty much in the opening minutes of the game against the Chiefs on last Sunday. Uzomah has been a huge factor, especially developing the offense, allowing the offense to open up more so Jamar Chase can get open for those big plays. Didn't really have a big part in the title game, but maybe that was because of Uzomah's injury. But first 2 games having 100 yards, basically being the top target out there. And T. Higgins has had 2 big games as well. Now, I didn't have to research because I knew offhand, actually, yeah, of course I did have to research that Drew Sample is the guy who is going to be the tight end that would replace him if this comes about, that Uzomah doesn't play. Uzomah is still out. He had a bad knee injury. He got carted off the field, but this is the Super Bowl. We'll see how much progress he makes on the knee. He's made some signs of progress over the week. Hasn't practiced yet, though, but having at least on the field tight end that can catch passes for Joe Burrow, who is going to be feeling it pressure-wise in more ways than one on Super Bowl Sunday, will help the Bengals possibly pull off the minor upset. And it would be a very minor upset because that's a 4 to 3.5 point spread in a lot of different ways. All right. Moving on to the Bengals, who overcame a 21-3 deficit and the dreaded kiss of death in losing the OT coin toss. I've never seen a crowd so much more happier thinking that they would win after that moment in a 27-24 OT win at Arrowhead. Now, before we continue, somebody I heard over the week where people accusing QB Patrick Mahomes being a choker, and people saying, you think Tom Brady would ever blow a lead like that? Except the 18-point lead that Mahomes blew in the second half is tied with the 18-point lead that Tom Brady blew in 2007 against the New England Patriots. So there's a fact check for you. This has been the Bengals' 3rd Super Bowl appearance all time, first in 33 years, once again against the California team. Jay, what positive for their KC business trip do the Bengals need to carry over in their next business trip to LA?
Yeah, and honestly, it's not being afraid to get creative with defensive adjustments against a dynamic offense. I mean, you think about it, the biggest reason the Bengals are in the Super Bowl is the halftime adjustment they made in the AFC title game to frustrate and shut down Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and that Chiefs offense. Changing their defensive scheme to a rush 3, drop 8 with a 2-high safety shell completely took Kansas City out of their game. Drop 8 is a way for a defense to flood the vision of the quarterback, and it becomes hard to pinpoint where to throw because the windows are not as clear. You don't have a known spot to throw to because of the extra defenders. On the season, the Bengals' overall defensive numbers aren't eye-popping. They're 12th in EPA per drive and 15th in success rate. But their willingness to change things up when their original game plan wasn't working is the type of flexibility they may need against another explosive offense in the Rams. Bengals dropped 8+ defenders in coverage on a season-high 35% of the pass plays, and it gave Mahomes fits. He completed just 7 of 13 passes for only 59 yards, was picked off and sacked twice. Now, Mahomes had loads of times to throw, but he had no open receivers to throw to. The Chiefs scored a total of 3 points in their final 8 possessions. They punted 4 times, turned it over twice. The AFC title game was the worst second half by EPA per drive the Chiefs have ever played with Mahomes at quarterback, and that's a 74-game sample size, regular season and playoffs. Stafford has faced 8 defenders in coverage on only 43 dropbacks this season, but there were 3 opponents who used it most frequently against the Rams offense this year. The Cardinals in week 4, the Titans in week 9, and the Niners in week 10. All 3 of those teams beat the Rams. Furthermore, Stafford completed just 36% of his 18 attempts against those coverages, and there was an interception in there. We all know how good Stafford is against man coverage, against single high coverage, and the blitz. He's the number 1 ranked quarterback in terms of EPA per play against all of them. So going to an 8-man coverage sooner rather than later may be the Bengals' best chance to contain Stafford and potentially force him into the type of hero throws that have resulted in those league-high 17 regular season interceptions, including a 3-game pick-6 streak in November that contributed to 3 Rams losses. Look, the obvious way to get a defense out of an 8-man coverage, run the ball. The Chiefs refused to do so when the Bengals went that route, and it cost Kansas City the game. How Sean McVay and the Rams react, will they shift and let what's overall been a mediocre running game led by Sony Michel and Cam Akers become the focal point of the offense? If and when Cincinnati goes this route with the drop 8, it could determine who takes home the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah, like I said, this is just such a weird game in general, especially considering where the Bengals were just 2 years ago, for God's sake. So I'm very interested to see how this goes on as the week goes on. Now, the Bengals are owned by Mike Brown, so I can't really call them the Fighting Browns here. So, Joe, give me an X factor for the Fighting Burrows.
Well, I decided to go a little different tact this way, and I picked Eli Woodard, otherwise known as Eli Apple. He changed his name. He also gave himself the nickname the Quiet Assassin, and with his Ohio State education, doesn't understand what the word quiet means, obviously.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit confused there, I think. But here's a guy who did make one big play the other day after giving up loads and loads of passes to Travis Kelce all second half. But he did make one big tackle at the end of the first half that poor play calling. I'm not going to give him all the credit for being able to bring down the cheetah because that was his responsibility on the play. But I think if he can play decently, and if he can play better than decently, if he can make some plays happen. I mean, here's a guy who had 10 passes defensed all year long. So it's not as if he's, going up against number 1 receivers all week long. He had 6 tackles last week, which, again, I'm not sure how many tackles you want your cornerback to have, because unless they're in run support, that's what really counts. If you get some tackles for loss or those types of things. It's sort of like when your safety is your number 1 tackler. Well, where are those tackles? Are they at line of scrimmage, or are they 40 yards down the field? So I think Eli, and he should be, because of his comments and how much he dislikes every place he's played before. I guess Matt Rule told him he'd never played another NFL game, which is very Matt Rule-like to make a statement like that.
He has no intention of actually keeping.
Yeah, it's a very college coach statement. You'll never play again unless you listen to me. Sean Payton did make a little joke about how he roots for all his ex-players. He said Eli a little, but I think that this guy could become either a liability or a hero because he does have the ability at times to make good plays. But like I said, when they put him one-on-one on Travis Kelce last week, that didn't work at all, and they had to change that up too. So I think it'll be fine. Obviously, the crowd will get on him early if they get a few balls against him and see how he holds up in there. Again, the guy's been in the league a while now, which I give him all the credit in the world for being resilient. He's been with 5 different teams. Hasn't quite lived up to that. Actually, he has lived up to that first-round Ohio State potential. perfectly, actually. He's lived up to the Ohio State first round potential. Not very good. And we'll see how he fares in this game against some fairly good competition in Odell and Cup and Washington.
Did you mention the drop possible pick six that could have put him in the same level as the 49ers? I thought that was
guy too much,
that was something that was almost like I had eyes in the. Let's not forget that, because Mahomes was playing terrible and you literally could have won the AFC Championship with a pick six. And then we talk about Eli Apple differently.
If they had lost the game, I think that obviously is the biggest.
Oh, it's huge. It's worse than a lot of different things. So, Anthony, we were so quick to pick on Eli Apple that I forgot to go back to you. Anthony, for a Bengals team that lost 7 times in the regular season, they sure as heck were imperfect 6 days ago and haven't really been perfect too much this year. What negative from that game specifically needs to go away?
Well, it's pretty much the Achilles heel. That's the offensive line. Think of it like this. Joe Burrow is the first quarterback in NFL history to be sacked 50 times in a regular season. He was sacked 51 times and made it to the Super Bowl somehow, some way. It's still intact with all 4 limbs still attached. But you think about the offensive line, and even in the postseason, they gave out 2 sacks against the Raiders. They gave out 9 against Tennessee. We know about that one. And they only gave out 1 against Kansas City. The only problem is Joe Burrow showed the world that knee injury he suffered last year is healed up pretty nicely. And his ability to escape and get out of the pocket when things could have gotten a lot worse. Living on one drive alone in the fourth quarter that led to the field goal that gave him the lead. Joe Burrow on 3 separate plays got out of would-be sacks and was able to run and pick up a first down. The thing with Cincinnati is that they've been going to the pass a lot more on first down. Up until that point, Kansas City, they ran the ball a lot more on first and second down to try to keep the defense honest. And obviously, when you have a pass rush like what the Rams are bringing to the table, you want to keep them honest. But what the Bengals did do last week that I think would be a great weapon in the Super Bowl is that they got the ball out of Burrow's hands very quickly. Quick 3-step drops, quick passes, quick dump balls. Don't even let him get hit. Don't give the defensive line any time to try to get into the backfield. And when the Rams do play kind of like a 5-2 defense, which they do mix in every once in a while and bring in an extra pass rusher, those quick passes tend to open up a lot more because they're all more room to run and more spaces in the second tier of that defense. Think of it like this: that the Bengals throwing the ball a lot on first down during the regular season, it plummeted back down to maybe like 60% first down rate against the Chiefs, which was actually up 13% from the previous 2 games. So I think Cincinnati knows that the offensive line is a bit of a problem, and they're trying to game plan around that. But it may actually be because of how the Rams like to play their defense. The fact that they play a lot more zone than the 3 teams that they played previously. Those quick passes and being able to kind of get the ball out of Burrow's hands right away may actually help the Bengals offense as far as just gaining momentum and being able to be in a position where maybe the passing game sets up the run game, which doesn't happen often in the NFL. But if your passing game is good enough, I mean, it slows up a pass rush as much as anything. And I think that's what's going to be the key is getting the ball out of Burrow's hands, and take advantage of the Rams' aggressive defense, particularly when they bring in that extra lineman.
16 pressures last week from the Chiefs. Only one time they got to Joe Burrow, and the Rams must have saved all of their sacks for the Super Bowl because they never got an official sack on Jimmy G. But that final interception is about as good as a sack was because Jimmy G basically did his own Carson Wentz impersonation and said, "Go get it," and no one got it. Okay. So I've never usually gone the Captain Obvious pick for a player who the Bengals need to stop. but I'm going to this time. Cooper Kupp has just been that goddamn good in this postseason. And you would think for somebody who is the first guy to win the Triple Crown in so many years of wide receiving, that you would be able to stop a guy who has improved every single year in this league. You'd be wrong, because he has had 142 yards in 183 yards in the NFC divisional round against the Bucs, and 142 yards in the win against the San Francisco 49ers. Plus, in the fourth quarter, just key play after key play, 40-yard run down the right side, the pass over the middle on the worst call ever that the Bucs defense made against a healthy Bucs team, going for 50+ yards. The 49ers are one of the best defensive teams in the NFL, and Kupp just managed to get into the back of the field again. 191 targets, 145 receptions, 1,947 yards, 16 scores, over almost 115 receiving yards per game, over the 100-yard mark 11 times this season. That's Cooper Kupp's resume. And you're going up against a Bengals defense that ranks 26th receptions allowed and 25th in yards allowed per game to the opposing slot wide receivers. A couple of fun facts for you. He is the odds-on favorite to win the MVP in this Super Bowl. He's got the lowest odds of 600. That's even higher. And this is a quarterback league. Quarterbacks have won this award 31 times. And he's got the highest prop for wide receiving yards ever in Super Bowl history. The highest prop last year was Travis Kelce for 98. He has a 102.5 yard prop, which is almost unheard of to say. We know we're pretty damn sure he's going to go for 100 when you make that prop, because I'm sure a lot of people will take the over on him. It's amazing to see how there are good wide receivers on this team. Odell Beckham is Odell Beckham. And you don't really have too much. Higbee's done enough in his regular season, and Van Jefferson might as well just be on a milk carton right now this postseason. He has done nothing in these last two games. And Cooper Kupp just keeps making play after play after play. And that's why there's no other answer to this question. I could go and say running back, but no, it's Cooper Kupp, and it's Cooper Kupp all day.
He's like Jordan, Rabbi. You can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him.
But if Jordan had this history, like Cooper Kupp has gone from like Eastern Washington to this. Hey, incredible. He was almost built to be a Patriot, but he's actually around. Okay. That does it for Joe Tufaro. Thank you, sir. He's got a nice little Twitter account he helps out with, an accountable reps. It's always fun to see him. Next Wednesday, we will have a formal Super Bowl preview, and we will see you then. Good afternoon, sir.
Good to see you, Joe.
All right, take care.
All right. Finally tonight, we salute what is currently going on Beijing right now, and something that is so under the radar. The same damn company doing the Olympics and Comcast is doing the Super Bowl and probably promoting that Dan Belair show at the exact same time, so you can understand how it was a shock to all of us that the Olympics are underway. They've been underway for 3 days. A lot of American athletes going over to these games. Let's pick one, starting with Mr. Strait.
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys had a posse bet on me picking Chloe Kim, but not this week. I'll maybe talk more about her next week if we do even bring up some kind of semblance of an Olympic segment. And also Shaw White as well. I'll just throw those two honorable mentions.
Who's about to retire, by the way, as of officially today, saying that'll be his 5th Olympics too, which is insane because he's only 35.
Yeah, but I will go with Team USA women's hockey. By the way, shout out to them for being in the game because they are on NHL 22 from EA Sports. So that's kind of a cool thing. Again, I get to play one of my niece's favorite players in Hillary Knight, who is one of the players to kind of keep an eye on going into the Olympics. Team USA women is 2-0 already. They already won. They beat They won against Finland and then beat the athletes of Russia. They don't really have an official title, but
Russia Olympic Committee is the official name, by the way, just to let you know.
So they're 2-0 already in group play. And Hillary Knight, obviously, this is her 4th Olympics for Team USA women hockey. So she's kind of the elder statesman here. And you think about the fact that she's fifth all time in points. Actually, she's fourth now because she moved up earlier today, getting a point in the 5-0 win earlier today. And you think about it, and also, give me just a second, my computer screen is slow. Kendall Coyne Schoenfeld, the team captain, and obviously for those who are not familiar with her, remember 2019 NHL All-Star Weekend, where she was part of the fastest skate competition and obviously one of the fastest skaters in the world. Those are two key players to keep an eye on, but they lost Brianna Decker to an injury in the win over Finland in the first game. She's done for the Olympics. And it's going to test the depth on this team because they did not bring a taxi roster over to Beijing, and that's a bit of a concern when you think about the COVID situation and the very strict protocols they're going to be on, but also with injuries. I mean, they have a luxury at goalie. Well, Matty Rooney, the starting goalie from that gold medal game 4 years ago, is kind of in a goalie by committee because they've been able to rotate the players in and out. But this is a team that coming into the Olympics has struggled a little bit. In the World Championships, they finished second. They really had a hard time getting the puck into the offensive zone. They were 5 for 35, but 3 for 35, I should say, on a power play during that tournament. And their losses came against, obviously, Canada, the team that we presumably is going to come down to once again. But USA, what they have to do is, and what they've done in the first 2 games, is do what they do best: be aggressive, get into the offensive zone, and attack. They outshot. They had the shoot advantage. I'm watching the replay now, actually, on my screen. 62-12 was the shot advantage. They have literally outshot the opponents in the first 2 games 112-24. So they've done a great job of controlling the puck, getting opportunities, getting shots on net, because and the transition from defense to offense is what Team USA does best. But they are a little older now. They have a mix of veterans, a mix of youngsters that is going to be kind of a key. So that's what I'm going to be watching for, especially when they play Canada. And I have to throw this out there. Abby Rourke is the first indigenous player to make the Team USA roster. So a great shout out to her. Congratulations. But Team USA, again, it's going to come down to that matchup. But they play Monday, of course, against Canada, and that's kind of the odds-on favorite to be the gold medal game. They're all, by the way, because of the IIHL rules, everyone in Team USA's group is already qualified because of the world ranking. So the pool play at this point is just more of kind of a feeling out of what the best lineup is going to be moving forward, and who's going to start as far as the knockout rounds at goalie, because they have Rooney she's the third stringer. She didn't play in the World Championships because of injuries. So it's going to be interesting to see who they're going to lean on as far as the net, because right now the first 2 games, they really whoever's been at goalie really hasn't been tested all that much. That can change obviously in the next couple of days.
Can I put a negative damper to what you're saying? 60 shots, 5 goals in this game against the Rock. 50 goal shots, 5 goals, and 2 allowed against Finland. Remember, everybody's playing the same exact way. Canada won their first game against Switzerland 12-1, and then they took it easy today and won against the same Finland team that the U.S. played and won 11-1.
Yeah, and also
Canada is pissed.
Yeah, and by the way, I'll add to that. You want to see? All right, USA's goal differential is -8, right? Canada's is -21. So
yes,
they are
and it's probably going to get into the high 30s at this rate, because Canada is rolling. Although again, women's, never mind. Anyway, Jay, talk about the Kayla Shepherd.
Yeah, there are a few Captain Obvious no-brainer selections here for Team USA, and Schifrin is one of them. For those who only pay attention to her during an Olympic year, her accomplishments from the previous Olympics and the expectations on her for the current one is kind of all we know and focus on for someone who may go down as the greatest skier of her generation. But she's kind of been through a lot since we last saw her on the podium in 2018 in Pyeongchang, where she came in with grand plans to compete in 5 races across skiing's 2 very distinct disciplines. She won gold in the giant slalom, silver in the combined, but finished 4th in the slalom, missing bronze by 800th of a second, and was forced to pull out of 2 other events, largely due to the delays that caused the rescheduling of the giant slalom, and super G from 3 events in 6 days to 3 events in 3 days. Then in February of 2020, not long before the pandemic started, she lost her father very suddenly. So while she was mourning and dealing with that, she was fighting through back spasms caused by a muscle strain. By the time she was ready to get back on skis and compete in March, COVID hit and shut down the season. During that summer, she binge-watched the Tokyo Games and identified very much with Simone Biles, who pulled out of multiple events due to mental health issues and the pressure to be perfect and the expectations placed on one who is considered the GOAT of their sport, especially when those lofty expectations are not met. Biles was expected to dominate and bring home gold in every event she was supposed to enter in, as was Schifrin. And when, like Biles, Schifrin didn't meet those expectations, the negativity from the online community was harsh, and it, along with the death of her father, impacted her greatly and her performances suffered. She just was not mentally ready to competitively ski again. Eventually, she found ways to cope and began to resemble the skier we all remember. Process over outcome is a lesson her father emphasized, and Schifrin has taken it to heart. And it's paid off this season as she tied the record for most wins in a single discipline with her 46th slalom win back in November. The legendary Ingemar Stenmark held that mark alone for 32 years until Schifrin tied it at age 26. The expectations are there once again. Everybody will looking to see if she can tie or eclipse Julia Mancuso's record for most medals won by a female American skier of 4. But Kayla Shepherd has her own expectations. Can she handle the pressure of the Olympics, regardless of how she fares on the slopes? She believes she can. Maybe if things break right, both sets of expectations will be met. 2 storylines, 1 Olympic athlete. I'll be watching and rooting for her.
All right, and to finish it off, I'm going to go with the guy who, like Simone Biles, has dominated the sport that he is currently in for the last few years, but he's not coming off an Olympics where he had a great run, and that's Nathan Chen. So at the 2018 Winter Olympics, Chen had a meh short program, but it still allowed the U.S. to place 3rd in the team event. And this is not an event that that people care about as much. The team event has only been around for figure skating since 2014. His short program was one of the worst short programs he could ever do when he finished 17th. But then he had a great free skate and had the highest free skate score in Olympic history, but only finished in 5th, not in the gold medals. That short program killed him. So then he went on to win in Milan at the World Figure Skating Championships and became the first U.S. Men's World Championship since Evan Lysacek, who won himself an Olympic medal in 2009. He went on to do it again in 2019. He went on to do it again in 2020. Basically, what Nathan Chen has done, he won national titles like crazy. He's won 5 straight national titles. He's won 3 straight world championships since then. And the sport of figure skating, and I did this with help of research from my wife, has gotten so crazy because, as we mentioned, I think with the Summer Olympics with Simone Biles, Nathan Chen learned his quads very, very quickly, his quad jumps, that he had done 6 quad jumps in a single free skate. Then they decided to drop it down to 4 quad jumps because of how much people had been depending on the quad jump so much. But Nathan Chen has, again, in the free skate, he had in 2021, he landed 5 quads, won his 3rd world title. He is the first man, and since Patrick Chan from Canada, and the first American to have won 3 world titles in a row. The man is undefeated since the 2018 Olympics. So the pressure is going to be on him. And luckily for him, he got a chance to prove it early. He took to the ice on Thursday night and delivered a 111.71 and helped in the short program and helped his team have the highest score of the season. So Nathan Chen is going to be a favorite. He is not the dominating overall favorite because Yujiro Hanzo of Japan, who has won back-to-back Olympic titles for men's figure skating is looking for number 3. Now, we really, in the US, obviously, I think we focus a lot more on the women, but I think it's going to be a very interesting beginning of the week next week. I think Tuesday and Wednesday, the men go, because Nathan Chen could do something in dominating a sport that hasn't been dominated by men in figure skating in over 10 years. And that wasn't really domination. This would be the end of a brilliant 4-year cycle for Nathan Chen. This has been a very interesting show. And we haven't even mentioned Chloe Kim, who is going to defend his title again. We didn't even mention Shaun White, who is, like I said, the Flying Tomato is ending his career after this. Men's hockey, obviously, will be a story. Men's curling will be a story, as John Schuster was one of the flag bearers in yesterday's opening ceremonies. And again, I can't keep my eyes off of curling when I see it on my screen. But for that, we're done. That does it for our show. So for Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait and Joe Tufaro, this has been On the Sports Lines. Facebook.com/On the Sports Lines for live streams. YouTube.com/On the Sports Lines for dead streams. I mean, on-demand streams. And
at ONTH Sports Lines is our Twitter handle, where you will find the link to this show, along with some other interesting sports-related tidbits that we think you should check out.
Now, I guess that bad tongue is caught up on everybody. We'll see you in 4 days for our official Super Bowl preview. Good afternoon from all of us.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone.